From KPFK in Los Angeles, California, Valley Free Radio in Florence, Massachusetts, WNUC in Detroit, and biketalk.org worldwide, this is Bike Talk.
Bike Talk?
Welcome to Bike Talk. I'm Taylor Nichols.
And I'm Nick Richard.
Hey, Nick.
Hey, Taylor.
You know, Josh Bowden helped me from Adventure Cycling about trying to plan my bike trip, and I'm planning a long bike trip. And I think this started a long time ago when you were doing a couple of days of a bike packing trip.
Is that what inspired you?
That and, you know, a lifelong desire to ride my bike a long way. But I'm planning a bike trip from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Mackinac Bridge, from my daughters who live in San Francisco to my dad, who's 101, who lives in Michigan in the house I grew up in. And I'm starting to get kind of nervous about it, you know?
It's coming up in May?
Yeah, I'm going to leave May 15th, and I'm thinking I can do it in between 7 and 8 weeks.
That's Bike Month, right? May? Is that also?
May's Bike Month, right?
Is that Bike Week? I know Bike Week's in there.
Well, there's Bike to Work Week. I know that. I don't think there's Bike Home Week. Is there a Bike Home Week? Maybe I'll try to start Bike to Your Dad Week.
So specific.
As I've been planning the ride, I've been going to Bike with GPS and adventure cycling and looking at the route. And it's about 3,500 miles. And it's going to take me almost 2 full months to do it. I'm planning on camping for a good portion of the way and then stay in hotels when I'm exhausted or whatever. But each morning when I wake up in my bed with my wife, with my pillow and my blanket, I'm like, God dang, do I really want to do this?
I don't know. You're making me nervous now.
And there's a lot of hills too.
Are you going to still do the show?
Yeah, I'm planning on it. I want to connect with you and with people on the show weekly with where I am and what I'm doing. But really what I want to do, and I got this from Simon Parker, the English writer who rode his bike across America. I want to connect with the people that I meet along the way, you know? Mm-hmm. And I want to tell some of their stories.
Sounds great. It sounds like the trip of a lifetime.
Well, we'll see. But I'm getting kind of nervous. I've been taking the bike mechanic class, so I'm getting much more comfortable with my bike. And I've been putting my panniers on the back of my bike and putting weights in the panniers and then riding around LA and riding up the canyons around LA. And the bike handles differently and takes a fair amount more effort to go up a hill when you have a couple of 10-pound weights on the back of your bike.
Right. Are you going to be in a tent?
Yeah, I'm taking a tent. I'm hoping that a couple of buddies come and join me on part of the stretch. One buddy might join me in Florence, Oregon, and ride with me a little ways into Montana. And then Marga, my wife, is going to fly and meet me and drive a couple of days with me as I ride. My brother John might come and join me. And then what's really fun is I have a lot of old friends from growing up in Michigan who are lawyers and bankers and CEOs and stuff. And they are going to meet me at the Mackinac Bridge when I'm on the last little leg of my trip and ride with me home. And I think that sounds really fun to see those guys and have a welcoming party when I get to Michigan.
Lawyers and bankers and CEOs? What is it? There's no
there's no Indian chiefs in that crowd, but they're all just serious guys, you know.
Okay.
No actors.
What are the states that you're going through?
I'm going to ride along the coast north from San Francisco to Florence, Oregon, along the Pacific coast. Then I cut east across Oregon into Idaho, into Montana. Then I'm going to get on the Lewis and Clark Trail in Montana and take that through Montana, North Dakota, into Minnesota. And then I get on the Northern Tier Trail, which goes Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then the Great Lakes Trail, which takes me to the Mackinac Bridge. And I just found out recently that bikes aren't allowed on the Mackinac Bridge, so I have to take a ferry across. I really wanted to ride across the bridge because you can ride across the Golden Gate Bridge.
Just because it's against the law doesn't mean you can't do it.
Exactly, yeah. And like I said, my friends are lawyers.
And so is this open if, like, I was listening and I'm in Montana and I want to join you for a leg of the trip?
Listen, that would be a freaking blast. Yeah. I would love that. Love that. Full stop.
Cool. All right. The buildup starts now.
And I think as we get closer to May 15th, I'll talk about it a little bit more about how I'm planning and what my bike looks like. But Josh Bowden from Adventure Cycling was great and really gave me a lot of advice. One of them, which was ride your bike with your panniers on it and some weight in those panniers and get used to how the bike handles and how much more effort it takes to move it along.
We have a couple emails from listeners. One was about your comment. You said you wonder about people who ride with backpacks.
Right.
So somebody wrote in, you were wondering why people bike with backpacks. Here's my answer. I have a rack and panniers, but I still frequently choose to bike with my backpack because the extra weight on the rear of my bike makes carrying my bike up the few flights of stairs in my apartment building a little scary. It's easier with my backpack, and I don't totally trust leaving stuff in the lobby to make multiple trips. And on the days it's wet and or cold, my backpack helps keep me warm and dry too. That was from a listener in San Francisco. So there you go.
Well, they are totally right. And I do stand corrected that sometimes it's good to have a backpack.
Tim Dyet of Grand Island, New York, wrote a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
He writes, the in-depth nature of bicycles and bike culture doesn't get spoken about enough. Bike Talk on every episode has guest speakers who are educated and practiced in what they discuss about bicycle culture and how it impacts everyone's life. Nick and Taylor aren't hosts who are full of themselves. They're here to tell the ever-unfolding story of the bicycle. The opinions of the lawmakers, politicians, blue-collar, white-collar, everyone has a seat at the Bike Talk table.
So nice. So yeah. Tim gets Bike Talk stickers. Yes.
Yeah. Review the show and like the show, of course, on social media. It really helps us reach a wider audience. Send us an email and we will read it on the air and send you some stickers.
Also, last week, we heard from attendees of the National Bike Summit in Washington, D.C.,
right.
And there were a lot of attendees from North Carolina, including Bike Walk North Carolina's executive director, Terry Lanzell, who talked about this law in North Carolina.
It's a crazy law, right?
Yeah. You cannot have standalone active bicycle or pedestrian projects. They felt they were in danger of having bike paths or pedestrian paths.
Yeah, because those are dangerous.
And so they took action.
Does that mean if you can't have a standalone bike or ped project, it has to be married into a bigger bill? Is that what they're saying? Or is this just a way of negating any kind of progress in bike ped projects?
It's both. These people, they love cars. And they feel like anything that's not a car is hostile to cars. That's what the administration actually said that they're against, anything that's hostile to cars.
Right. Well, we have Caron Whitaker, who is the executive deputy director of the League of American Bicyclists. She talks about this same thing. So maybe we should go to Caron really quick.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So a big topic on our show has been e-bikes versus e-motos. And I think a big topic at the National Bike Summit was also e-bikes and e-motos. I wonder if you could tell us what House Resolution Bill 7839 is.
Sure. It's called the Safe Speeds Act, which would create federal standards for low-speed electric bikes. What it would do is it directs the Consumer Product Safety Commission to create a new definition of what an e-bike is, separating it from what an e-moto is, and then saying that you can't sell an e-moto legally by calling it an e-bike.
Great. That's big because that's what we've been talking about for a long time. This is an issue that is just not going away.
Right. We're seeing organizations dealing with it at the community level or at the state level, and it really feels like the right place is to deal with it at the federal level. We have good bipartisan support on it. There's actually more Republicans than Democrats on it right now. And we think that a federal definition would be easier for bike shops and would be easier for consumers and easier for parents buying things for their kids.
Right. So everybody knew what was what. However, if the bill does pass, maybe that won't solve all of our problems. And I wonder if you could elaborate on that.
Sure. We look to the Consumer Product Safety Commission to set the guidelines and standards of how fast an e-bike can go with pedal assist. We were also looking to it to set a standard for lithium-ion batteries used for e-bikes and e-micromobility.
Right.
However, in the last year, the status of the CPSC has changed. They did pass a rule to create that lithium-ion battery standard, but once they passed it, the president fired 3 of the commissioners, the 3 Democrats on the commission.
because of passing this bill about bicycles?
The e-bike battery was definitely the catalyst. The White House has put out an executive order saying no new regulations, or no new regulations unless you get rid of 10. The commission voted against, saying we're going to have to take out 10 other safety regulations.
Right. They just wanted to protect people.
Right. Then we were down to 2. They reversed the ruling on the lithium ion battery, and then one of those 2 has since resigned. So now the commission is only 1 person, with staff, of course. And that commission, which has always been an independent, quasi-independent commission, the administration is pushing hard for that to be put under HHS, where it would lose that independent status.
The Consumer Product Safety Commission.
Right.
Wow.
There's a lot of concerns, both that it would no longer be independent, that it would be under HHS, but also that there's only 1 person. I don't know how you have a quorum.
Right.
Right? Like, I don't know what their bylaws are, but there may be bylaws that say you have to have at least 3 members present to do anything.
Right.
So even if we pass this federal law, we can't rely on it being implemented. It might not be able to be done with just 1 commissioner. It's also, if it's not independent, it's just less trustworthy.
Here you have this issue that you've at the League have been working on for some time, which is e-bike battery safety. And because they tried to do something about that at the CPSC, they were gutted by the Trump administration. And now they're like a dead commission and useless. And then even if you have a bill that regulates e-motos and classifies e-bikes, it's not going to be effective. And all this is happening because of this Trump administration. Do you find it difficult to be nonpartisan in this environment?
So we haven't changed our positions on anything. And when we look at the legislation that we're pushing, almost all of the things we're doing are bipartisan. But we are finding ourselves on the opposite side of the administration on a lot of things, especially these types of safety regulations, where they don't want to give anything.
Right. Is biking a left-right Republican-Democrat issue? Maybe this current administration is not really even a Republican administration. It's kind of its own outlier.
I think that's fair. Even in the first Trump administration, they were letting bike lane projects go forward. They were letting grants with bicycle infrastructure move forward. They were giving out education grants. They weren't necessarily promoting it at the level that the Biden administration did, but things were moving forward. And now we're hearing a lot of rhetoric, at least, about trying to stop it.
Well, they're also trying to take away the 15th Street bike lane in Washington, D.C.
That's true. This bike lane is basically the spine of the D.C. bike network. But we also sort of think of it as America's bike lane, right? It goes by the Washington Memorial. It goes by the Jefferson Memorial. Actually goes really close to the White House. Everyone's national capital. And the reason that they can do this is this bike lane is a National Park Service bike lane, so they don't have to involve the city. But the city has done before and after studies, and they've shown that the bike lane has reduced all crashes by more than 45%. It's reduced bike crashes by over 90%.
Wow.
And travel times for people in cars is actually faster. When people know where they're supposed to be, it sort of brings order to the road.
Right. But we had Callie Krumpos on the show last week from WABA, the Washington Area Bicycle Association. And she said basically the same thing, that the bike lane is working, doing what it was designed to do. Let's just hope that we stay on that fight and are able to keep it. Because I love what you say, that it's America's bike lane. It's everybody's bike lane.
At the National Bike Summit, we finished by having a rally and a protest against the removal of that. And there's so much energy. And I think people around the country see this happening in Washington, D.C. They're angry about that bike lane, but they're also concerned about what's going to happen to their own bike network. Stay tuned. We're figuring out what is that next step where people around the country can also rally to protect America's bike lane and their own.
Caron Whitaker, the Deputy Executive Director of the League of American Bicyclists, thanks for the Bike Summit a couple weeks ago, and thanks for staying on top of the Safe Speeds Act that differentiates between e-bikes and e-motos. And thanks for coming on Bike Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Caron clearly pointed out that by putting in that bike lane along 15th Street in Washington, D.C., has made it better for cars because it has taken some people off the road who are no longer driving or choosing to drive because they can now choose to ride a bike.
Bike infrastructure is better for everyone, including drivers. And now it's Stacey Randecker.
With Charlie's News.
Charlie's transitioning and they're working together.
To a different job.
Yeah, different job. He was an intern. Yeah. Time has come.
So here's Stacey with Charlie's News.
I'm Stacey with this week's news. From bicycle retailer and industry news, in a rare showing of bipartisanship, the Safe Speeds Act has been introduced in Congress. This would create federal standards for low-speed electric bikes and e-motos. There is wide-ranging support for this legislation, including People for Bikes, the League of American Bicyclists, the National Bicycle Dealers Association, Safe Routes Partnership, Consumer Reports, Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the Rails to Trails Conservancy. Good luck with this. Bay Area NBC reports that the California Highway Patrol, or CHP, impounded 85 bicycles from riders that were reportedly riding in a reckless manner throughout San Francisco. The riders were intercepted riding up the Harrison Street off-ramp, attempting to ride the Bay Bridge. The western span of the bridge, connecting San Francisco and the East Bay cities of Emeryville, Oakland, and Berkeley, does not have a bike lane. There is no word on the vehicle impound status of the 15 traffic crashes in San Francisco from that day. The Charlotte Observer, in conjunction with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, have presented a world-class example of victim blaming with an 8-year-old girl who was killed when she biked out of her quiet residential neighborhood yard. The article's title reads, 8-year-old girl on bicycle dies after colliding with car in Charlotte, CMPD says. Naomi Summers was killed by Kyle Elijah Byrne, age 23, who was driving a 2006 Chrysler 300 sedan, which boasts a minimum V6 to a high-performance Hemi V8 engine, which translates to 200 to 425 horsepower. Bernie was arrested and charged with driving while license revoked, no liability insurance, failure to register, and driving with a fictitious registration. Scott Horsley of NPR reports that the CEO of Guardian Bike Company, manufacturing children's bikes in Seymour, Indiana, is lobbying for tariffs against his rivals. This could become a test case of the administration's strategy of using import taxes to promote domestic manufacturing. Bicycle retailers and importers are firmly opposed, noting that Guardian bikes would benefit from higher tariffs, while the rest of the U.S. bike industry would pay the price. They argue that higher tariffs would raise prices and put bikes out of the reach for some families.
Thanks, Stacey, for Charlie's News.
I guess it's going to be Stacey's news after a while, but we don't want to
kick Charlie to the curb. We've been talking a lot about laws lately, e-bike laws and bike laws, and laws can be written and they can be unwritten. Laws can be enforced and they can be unenforced. In New York City, Mayor Adams and the police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, have been criminalizing people who break minor laws on their bicycle, rolling through a stop sign, maybe not stopping at a stoplight, or I'm not even sure whatever else. But we've got a little panel here from New York, Sophia Lebowitz from Streetsblog New York and Shabazz Stuart from Oonee are here to tell us how that is changing under the new administration of Mayor Mamdani. Sophia and Shabazz, welcome back, as always, to Bike Talk.
Thank you.
How have things changed on the streets of the Big Apple?
Like you said, our former mayor, Eric Adams, and police commissioner Jessica Tisch put this policy in place a little over a year ago where cyclists in the city, they specifically said it was to target e-bike riders, but Streetsblog documented that actually all types of cyclists were getting caught up in it. But basically, if you got stopped by police for a minor traffic infraction, like running a red light, wearing 2 earphones, riding on the sidewalk, instead of getting a traffic ticket, you would get a criminal court summons. It was always in the NYPD's power to either give a criminal court summons or a traffic ticket. But the difference was they created this policy like, we are going to do criminal court summonses. So they started doing that. When Mayor Mamdani was campaigning, he was against that. Once he got elected and was inaugurated, it took a little while to have him follow through on his campaign promise to end the policy, but he did. He ended the policy, and officially now cops are not being directed to give out the criminal court summonses anymore to any cyclists. That doesn't mean they won't ever or that they can't, but it's just a new policy. So we're now watching to see and make sure that it's trickling down to all the cops on the street and that that's what's happening.
Well, have the streets gone crazy? Is everybody breaking laws? And
I don't know, Shabazz, have you noticed the streets going crazy?
There's a big conversation here that, for me, takes me back to a couple decades. Just looking at the big picture here, the city of New York used to hand out criminal summonses for a wide variety of quote unquote quality of life crimes. And around 2017, the city decided to say, look, we're no longer to require people to go to court because they got caught drinking on the street or, public intoxication or public urination. I mean, there was a wide variety of sort of quality of life crimes that would get you a criminal summons. And the criminal summonses, as you can imagine, were prejudicial. They were assigned, I would say, 70 to 30. The city's minority communities were the ones that were getting these criminal summonses. I think by 2021, there were 700,000 outstanding warrants because people, if you don't go to court to pay or to address your criminal summons, a bench warrant will be issued for your arrest. That's what happened to me as a, spry recent college graduate in 2022, where I was busted for biking on Hancock Street in Bedford-Stuyvesant. If you know Hancock Street in Bedford-Stuyvesant.
I used to live there.
So it's a quiet street. It's a brownstone street. I was on the sidewalk. It's a one-way street. So I wasn't going in the direction of traffic. I figured, I'll ride my bike on the sidewalk. And the police stopped me and they gave me this summons. And I said, the law at the time said you can't be biking recklessly on the sidewalk, but I wasn't biking recklessly. So I said, screw you, and I'll see you in court. And as a 22-year-old kid, I didn't do anything about it. I just said whatever. And so they issued a warrant for my arrest. And one day on my bike again, I think I was about to get off the sidewalk. The cop stopped me, and away I went to the clink, overnight to see the judge, who, of course,
you had to spend the night in jail.
Yeah. So look, at the time, and this still happens, the cops were very honest about 20 and 1. They said they had to hand out 20 summonses each month, and they got one arrest. And that was how they were sort of assessing productivity. And to quote the words of the officer, who were like in this weird arresting me, but being friendly to me. It was very bizarre, but it was all doing business. And they said, look, it's the end of the month. You got to be on point. And they let me put my stuff back in my apartment, which was apparently a huge favor, because if you go to the police station overnight, you might not get your stuff back, apparently. And I say this all to say that there are systemic issues here, right? We're talking about pulling people over. Oftentimes, these are people who do not speak English as a first language, introducing them into the criminal justice system, and then creating a dynamic where when, there is not due engagement on the part of that person, they now have a warrant issued for their arrest. And when that happens, you are basically a ticking time bomb, and you can disappear. I disappeared for 48 hours. Your stuff disappears. You have a job, not calling your job, that disappears. And you're in the clink for 24 to 48 hours while this gets cleared up for something that is relatively trivial. That is not proportionate to how we treat blowing across a red light in a 4-ton vehicle, where you can just sort of adjudicate that with a quick fine. When we started to shift over to civil summonses, it wasn't like people were peeing everywhere and drinking everywhere. And it wasn't that we saw all of these sort of rancorous quality of life crimes. And predictably, we didn't start seeing cyclists, running red lights everywhere and biking on the sidewalk, right? This was a tactic that was introduced in 2021 when the city saw a brief crime spike by a mayor and a police commissioner who wanted to look tough on crime. And, unfortunately, deliveristas and communities of color have typically borne the brunt of that systemic inequity for the purposes of looking tough.
Deliveristas on e-motos do break a lot of laws, it seems like. I mean, I don't live in New York now, but I have been there, and we've talked to a lot of people that say that. So how do you address that kind of pushback?
I just want to say, like, I totally agree with Shabazz. What was so interesting and kind of like puzzling about this whole it was sort of like a recriminalization of something that had already been decriminalized and that had already been sort of fleshed out in the public sphere of like, no, we don't want to do this as a city. We don't want to be criminalizing these trivial things because it's a waste of resources. It's a waste of people's time. It's unfair racialized enforcement. We see that every single time. So it was like already sort of publicly decided by policy that we weren't going to do this anymore. And then they sort of brought it back. In terms of actual reckless cycling, which can be a problem, it just was about what is actually causing harm to New Yorkers and what isn't. You know, I think when you think about quality of life issues like reckless cycling, you know, we don't want cyclists and people on e-bikes to be running red lights and riding on the sidewalk. But, you know, there's other ways to kind of address this, like better street design, education, actual traffic tickets that are still annoying and still sort of deter this kind of reckless riding. It was just sort of mind-boggling to see, like Shabazz said, you could run a red light in your car and get a traffic ticket. And on an e-bike, suddenly it was as if you're a criminal, when we know based on statistics that car drivers are creating the most danger on the street by far. Like it's, you know, it's not even something that can be compared. So that was sort of where it came from. It's not to say that we don't need to address reckless cycling and e-bikes and things like that, but it's just not really the way, is what experts sort of.
I just want to underscore what Sophia just said, because it's a great point that people don't make often enough. Cars break a lot of laws too. I mean, drivers break a lot of laws. We go down to Houston Street or Atlantic Avenue or Queens Boulevard, and you will see the posted speed limit, and you will see cars going way faster than that. That puts way more people in danger than someone who is speeding or on a sidewalk with an e-bike. One is a nuisance, one is an existential threat. When people see speeding cars, we don't hear, well, send them to jail, like impound their cars, but there's this disproportionality that's out of sync with how justice is supposed to operate in a civilized society like ours, right? Where if you commit a crime or a civil offense, your punishment is not supposed to be cruel and unusual. But essentially what we're doing is we're giving people cruel and unusual punishments. When someone gets a summons, that is a time bomb often, especially for someone who is not used to the criminal justice system, right, who speaks English as a second language. And when they get taken away, they will often lose their property, because they're not getting that back. Cell phones, cash that's on them. They will lose their e-bike that gets impounded at the police station, because they're not getting that back sometimes, right? They will, if they have to work for a job, they can't show up for that job. No, you know, they can't make a phone call. Hey, I'm in jail. How's that sound, boss? Right? Like, and so you're looking at these interactions that can destabilize a group of people that is already under economic duress, under economic stress, or economic marginalization. And that is, if that's not injustice, what are we really doing here?
And a lot of this was happening when ICE was kind of going rampant.
Yeah, it was totally at the same time. So people were really scared and confused.
That's what I was going to say, is that I think the elephant in the room is that this was at a time when the Adams administration appeared to be willing to work with the Trump administration, and you could get a summons for having two headphones in and then get taken to a detention center in Alligator Swamp and die. Let me just re-say that.
I think that was right.
Yeah.
The way summonses work is if you don't have your ID on you, that means you are getting taken away. You can't give someone a summons if they don't have their ID on them. And so that oftentimes a innocuous summons turned into someone lost their e-bike. That's $3,500 right there. Someone's getting taken, you know, the interaction can be much quicker than here's this thing you have to pay or deal with later. It can be literally same day.
Mm-hmm.
Nick?
That was all I had to say, was that this all happened during the deportations. And so I guess the other thing I would say was to your point, about the disproportionality of cars versus bikes, giving bikes criminal summonses and not the actual problem, which is drivers. The New York Post crowd, I don't know what you call them, the people who are in favor of giving people on bikes criminal summonses, they see themselves as drivers, but they don't see themselves as cyclists, and they definitely don't see themselves as food delivery workers.
Yeah, I think the comparison between bikers and car drivers, it's difficult to talk about, I think, a lot of the time, because we were saying, we want this to be more fair by having them get the same type of tickets. But on the other hand, we want to recognize the difference in the harm that can be created by these vehicles. On one hand, e-bike riders and bike riders shouldn't be getting worse consequences than car drivers. But we do, I think, need to start to think in the future about what are the rules for these cyclists? Why do cyclists have to stop at every single red light in the same exact way that car drivers do when the whole city is designed for cars? The Idaho stop, that's a whole thing that people fight for in different places. Now that we have this sort of level playing field back, thanks to Mayor Mamdani's reversal of the policy, I think now we have to think, okay, how can we look at this in the future to make this better, make the rules easier to follow and more logical for cyclists?
Do we have any idea why it took Mamdani so long to change the plan?
Well, actually, one thing we didn't mention, because I think to me and Shabazz, this is obvious, but to a non-New Yorker who might not be, Mamdani ended up keeping Jessica Tisch on as police commissioner, which he did not have to do. Usually mayors will choose their own police commissioner. So that was really, I think, why the conversations took so long, because this was really a policy that came really from her. She was the architect of the policy. And I would assume it took a lot for her to let it go, because, she wrote a whole op-ed about how it was a great policy, and it was very tied to her. So letting it go would be something I would assume they would have to discuss. So I think that's why it took a long time. But
I'm glad to hear that. And I'm glad that it's changed.
Streetsblog was out there asking about it at every press conference. And
they were. To Streetsblog's credit, I think that there was a lot of pressure from the Streetsblog team on holding Mamdani accountable, because he did promise to reverse it as a candidate. There are just two things I want to note. One is, just to build on Sophia's point, Mamdani kept Tisch on, not because I don't know what's in Mamdani's heart, but I don't think it's out of love. I think it was because politically there was this idea that Mamdani was young and he was going to be transformative and crime was going down, and this was sort of a olive branch to the New York Post crowd, as we might. So they have a power sharing arrangement, which is often how New York mayors treat their police commissioners. It's sort of a weird, awkward dance. It's not, the mayor sometimes can't just, I know it sounds bizarre, but they can't just order their police commissioner politically to do something. It has to be sort of a negotiation. And so there was a little bit of a negotiation there, but I just want to highlight the intersectionality here between, workers' justice and giving workers a fair, livable minimum wage and street safety. When you look at why there is this proclivity from e-cyclists who are delivery workers to run red lights or to bike on sidewalks or to otherwise break the law, it's because they're being harried and rushed and they're desperate to get to their orders in time. And that's driven by economic angst. And so part of the push here is, can we have a system where people are being paid more fairly and they're being given reasonable times to make their orders? And so they don't have to feel that need, because look, if you're late, there are real consequences on the platforms. And so, that's the sad part. People are scared.
Well, I am not a delivery rider, but I ride the wrong way and run stop signs and stoplights all the time, partly just to keep safe. Sometimes it's safer to salmon up a road rather than wait at the intersection or something like that. So I'm very glad that the implementation of the laws have been changed. Sophia Lebowitz of Streetsblog New York and Shabazz Stuart of Oonee, thanks for coming on and clarifying all this stuff for us. And we'll talk to you again soon, I hope.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
I think my positive takeaway from that interview is things are changing, is that Mamdani came into office and changed things. And this next interview is with Sunset for All. It's a project in Los Angeles about creating a very small section of Sunset Boulevard to be safe for people who choose to walk and bike, and an advocate who has worked tirelessly on it for 10 years. Most people, whether they're from Southern California or not, know of Sunset Boulevard. It runs from basically downtown LA all the way to the beach. It's famous for movies and the music scene in West Hollywood and all that. But it's also famous for being kind of a dangerous street to live, bike, walk, drive on. So an organization called Sunset for All started an outreach program maybe a decade ago to find a way to make part of it safe for the businesses along it and the people who live and use it. And our guest is Terence Heuston, who is an old friend of mine and was on the Los Angeles Bicycle Advisory Committee for a little while until he got too wrapped up in Sunset for All. Terence, welcome to Bike Talk.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back, Taylor. It's great to see you again, even though
Absolutely.
I guess we're on Bike Talk, so we're hearing at the moment. But well, I can see your face.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about what Sunset for All is? I know it's a traffic calming project, but maybe you could tell our listeners what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's evolved over time. The original vision was in 2015, the city of Los Angeles passed the mobility plan. Right. And the mobility plan, assigned certain corridors to have protected bike lanes or bus lanes or be truck routes. And so at the time, I was living in Silver Lake and I was commuting along Sunset with my toddler to school on my bike to daycare. And I couldn't figure out why it was so dangerous to choose any method but driving my kid to school.
Right.
Like, I guess, and, once you have kids, you start to have, more of an idea of, what about climate change? You want to make sure that they're safe and all of these things. I was Mr. Momming it, and I didn't just want to sit home all day. I wanted to find something useful that I could do beyond just being useful inside the house. And so I knew nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. I knew less than nothing about any of it, except why is the greenest forms of transportation the ones that are least comfortable and feel so impossible? Like, it just felt impossible.
Right.
And so I was on the sidewalk most of the time with him and all of those things. And so
you mean on the sidewalk?
On my bike. I was on my sidewalk on my bike carrying a kid on a Dutch bike and biking a couple miles from Silver Lake to Atwater Village. And I would ride, stretches of Sunset, but I would avoid it like the plague if I could. And so I met someone who was a bicycle activist, Don Ward. And I asked him, I'm like, what would you do? How do you start to get something like Sunset Boulevard safer? And he said, well, first you have to know how wide it is and what's possible and what the city plans are for it and all of those things. And I was like, screw it. I need a project. I'm just gonna try to figure out what this thing is.
Boy, were you a sucker.
I was a sucker. And I also started a blog called LA Bike Dad, where I was sort of telling stories about all my adventures with my kid traveling around the city on a bike. And so Don introduced me to a young transportation engineer, and we had coffee, and the engineer broke down what was possible, what wasn't possible, what was on, the mobility plan and all of these things. And I just sort of, I went back to a couple of friends that I had met in the community who were also interested in safe streets issues, and Scott Gamson and Jenny Chamberlain. And then we all just decided that we wanted to find a way to do it. And then just these sort of three citizens were just okay, how do we get the city? It is in the plans. It is in the city plans to have protected bike lanes there and to make that corridor safe.
And just to be clear, Terence, this was 2015?
2016,
2016.
2015, 2016.
Okay.
And so then I was like, okay, I'm just going to find a way to do it. And I didn't have any wool over my eyes. I figured it was going to take a decade. I just assumed it was going to take a decade. Of course, now we're a decade in and they're still just talking about the grant to do the study, to do the whatever. We ended up raising $60,000 from 360 local residents. Bike LA made it one of their primary projects. We did over 100 outreach, like events, meetings, presentations. We got letters from all the neighborhood councils, from local business associations. We knocked on every door on the 6.4 mile corridor of every business. We got a council member who was very skeptical of bike lanes, Mitch O'Farrell, to actually change his mind and have the city council pass a resolution in support of supporting Sunset for All.
Right. How long of Sunset were you trying to change? The whole stretch from downtown to the beach?
It was 3.2 miles, essentially like Dodger Stadium to Fountain, near Hollywood.
Okay. Just so people who don't know can get an idea, right?
And then there was a little spur down Santa Monica Boulevard from Sunset Junction to the subway, so we could connect 100,000 people to the subway, which would seem to be like a very high priority project. I'll also throw in there that it's a mountain pass. Right. That is the gap that you have going east-west. There is no way to go east-west into this downtown of the second largest city in North America.
Right.
Sunset Boulevard is supposed to be the way that you do it. It also connects to every single canyon, which is how you would get to the valley. It literally connects millions of people to downtown. Right. So it's not just a local project. It's a major corridor project.
Right.
And that's actually why we chose to put so much energy into it, because we were like, okay, if we're going to put our energy into something, what would be the most bang for the buck for the energy that we put in? This would be a regional transportation corridor that desperately needs safety upgrades.
Right. And connect all these different neighborhoods.
And connect all these different neighborhoods, millions of people to downtown core and vice versa. And Sunset Boulevard, like Sunset for All, would be connecting, Hollywood, where 10 million people visit, to downtown, essentially, if you connect all the various stretches that are supposed to be connected. And you have all of the old silent film studios. You have all this great modernist architecture. You have all these incredible iconic gay rights locations like the Black Cat and the Mattachine Steps. It's
Dodger Stadium, right?
Dodger Stadium. And it has this incredible multiculturalism to it. All of these things would be connected via the spine. And so it could just be this incredible cultural trail on top of it for the businesses that were more skeptical. We were able to sort of make that argument too.
Well, let me ask you, how did many of the storefronts along that section react? Because people often say, I don't want a bike lane in front of my store, then my patrons can't park.
I mean, their number one concern, honestly, is parking.
Right.
And that is a big challenge that you're always going to have. It's always going to be, to a certain extent, a zero-sum game. The way that we addressed that, because the council office at the time was never going to sign off on, removing parking on both sides. So we created like a bi-directional plan on one side of the street that would be protected, because that would have kept a lot more parking spaces than the alternative.
Right.
It's such a hard call, because this actually goes back to sort of like what you and I were discussing offline, because that goes back to like, well, what is outreach supposed to look like? What should it look like? And how do we address the climate crisis, or, this road street safety crisis and the deaths and all of these things, if we have this rubric or this framework where you have to get buy-in from every single person in the community, and every single group has a veto over doing projects that the city council has already passed and that science already shows is going to save lives.
Right.
So it's a hard balancing act. It would seem that the best way that I've seen it done when I'm reading about these things is, okay, we're going to change the corridor. This is a high injury network. We did the math. By the way, we also did time-lapse parking studies so they could know how many clients they were getting from each parking space versus the side streets. And what if you added a couple of parking meters to the side streets, you'd actually get more people. Anyways, we did an insane amount of work, and including the fact that we looked at the data, and over 1,000 people had been seriously injured in the previous decade on that one stretch, which is insane. And it was a part of the high injury network, which many of your listeners may or may not know, which would be the 6% of streets in Los Angeles where 70%, was it? It's been a little while since
of the crashes happened, right?
Yeah, of the serious injuries and deaths happen.
And just so people know, Sunset in that area is like 7 lanes wide, 2 lanes each direction, a left turn lane. And
and then 2 parking lanes. If you get 2 lanes of parking, and then there's door zone bike lanes that are terrifying.
Right.
And I just also want to give another framework, just sort of as you picture it. It was a part of Route 66. And if you look at Old Town Pasadena, what does Route 66 feel like there with, some scramble crosswalks, and some diagonal parking? All of a sudden you have a place where it's a place where people want to be, as opposed to a place where people want to get from like their dentist back to their house, in La Cañada. It's like, are we here to like hurry people to La Cañada, or are we here to have a sense of community and have a community main street? Well, so that was the theory behind it.
I wonder if you can go through the process that got you where you are now, and where are you now, and what is the next step because nothing has been put in the ground. But I did hear recently that the city council did approve the concept of Sunset for All. What was that?
I know that the city, which is a huge step, is applying for an ATP grant for the corridor. So that's, a special state grant where they would give millions of dollars in order for the improvements to be installed. And that's what we were trying to get all along for the last decade, was trying to get up further on that list.
And ATP is active transportation
program, I think.
Well, what's interesting to me is how people become so involved in the fight who aren't urban planners, transportation experts, that are like you and me, fathers and bike riders, and how we have taken on these kinds of projects to change our environment. And then it just, how difficult it is. And to see you work on it for 10 years and then take a step back is certainly understandable, but really a drag, because you have a lot of institutional knowledge about the project, and we need that kind of information to keep the project on the front burner.
I know, and there just seems to be so many more groups that are hyper focused to stop things, which I think is what inspired a lot of us. Excuse me. And I'd be totally remiss by not mentioning the fact that, Avital Shavit came on board in like 2018, 2019. And that's when we really took off. Like, Avital is just sort of a genius at organizing. And she's the engine behind Sunset for All today, along with their partnership with Bike LA. They're the ones who are driving the bus now. I would like to go off on a quick tangent, which is like why I burned out, like those types of things because I had so much experience doing sort of amateur outreach around various corridors. LA Dot asked if I'd be interested in doing any outreach consulting for them back in 2019. And so I was like, hey, it actually sounds kind of nice to get paid to do what I'm already doing for free. Right. And so we were part of this, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like a $3.5 million contract. I was getting paid very little. And so for the first month, they actually sent me, oddly enough, for a traffic circle in Koreatown. And so this is 2019. For 1 month, they had me knock on every business within like a half mile. So it was 4th in New Hampshire. 4th is the East-West Bike Boulevard through the city of Los Angeles, and that's considered supposed to be like the primary East-West bike route for that part of town. And New Hampshire is the primary North-South bike route. And so the confluence of these two intersections is a great candidate for a calming traffic circle, so that cars aren't just blasting through stop signs there as bikes are coming through, but they have to sort of, traffic calming you slow down because you have to go around that island in the middle of the street. So I do a month of outreach. I talk to the neighborhood council, I give presentations, I knock on every preschool, I knock on every elementary school door, I walk the blocks and talk to every single business, I hand out flyers in 8 different languages. And then culminating with Bike to Work Day, where they brought out, I don't want to exaggerate, I believe it was 5 engineers, and they filled the intersection with hay bales. Then they even had the fire department come and drive in a circle around it. They had a tent with like coffee and donuts. There was 4 or 5 other of us outreach people there, just anybody walking on by, giving them, a flyer about the project coming. And then I was off to other corridors until COVID struck, and then it went away. I would go through there every once in a while and see, is that calming circle there yet? Like a few years later, I'd be like, is it there yet? It's still not there. Is that little traffic circle isn't there yet? And then I saw on Instagram, like in 2022, I want to say, maybe 2023, an advertisement that they were doing outreach on that traffic circle again. So LA Dots, social media was once again promoting outreach on this one traffic circle at this one corner. I mean, and how many miles is LA? 572 miles. square miles. So this one little circle on 2 neighborhood streets. We're not even talking about, like, when I say 4th Street, it makes it sound, if you're not familiar with it, like, oh, that must be like a real street. There's just neighborhood.
No, it's a neighborhood street.
It's a neighborhood street. It's not an arterial. I'm like, oh, well, I guess great. Finally, they're finally going to put that thing in. Okay. And then what do I read? I want to say, was it last year or this spring? A 9-year-old was killed at that intersection.
Yes. Yeah.
But the person who killed the kid was taking a left turn. So if he had gone around a traffic circle, that death would not have happened.
Right. We have talked about that on the show, and it just seems like tactical urbanism is the answer for something like that. Just put it in with bales of hay and see how it goes, not just on some random Sunday, but for a month or two at a time.
I think the problem is more, I think that's a great idea, but I'm going to argue that the problem is more structural. And the problem, in my opinion, having done 10 years of outreach on various corridors, is that progressive processes prevent progressive execution. Like, we somehow came along, the story became in the nonprofit community and the transportation community that you weren't respecting communities, you weren't getting community knowledge, you were colonizing the streets if you just simply put in a scientifically proven safety measure. Now, there's been an award-winning study of road diets in LA, right? That award-winning study showed that when you reconfigure a street from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, you reduce, I believe it was severe injuries by 36%. Right. Okay. Now,
and businesses often thrive. Right?
Yeah, and businesses often thrive. But I'm just going to focus on the safety for a second. So if and it's also such a cheap, scalable thing. Like, it's so cheap. It costs them like $70,000, at least it did 5 years ago. It's probably a little bit more now, to restripe a street.
Right.
And so if you wanted to, there's, about 40,000 injuries, injuries in Los Angeles in traffic violence. There was, I haven't looked at the numbers in 2 years. You reduce that by 36%. You're talking about 15,000 people not injured every year. And where are most of them? They're mostly in what we would call, Black and brown communities, people of color communities, because the city was designed where, I want you to imagine Wiltern for a second, okay? If you're familiar with Wiltern, it is 2 lanes up near the Hollywood Hills. And then as soon as you hit Santa Monica Boulevard, it turns into a 4-lane super fast speedway.
Right.
And then you hit Hancock Park, and it becomes 2 lanes amongst what was a redlined neighborhood.
Right.
Where the white people lived in front of the fancy houses. And the moment the redlined neighborhood ends, it goes back to 4 lanes all the way down to South LA, becoming Arlington and becoming like an inland freeway, right? So sort of structural racism designed whose lives were valuable and whose lives weren't, and who deserved to have their neighborhood, sped through, and who, deserved to have their neighborhood be safe for kids walking to elementary school.
Terence, I didn't know that. And it's really interesting for you to hear that, because the pushback oftentimes for bike infrastructure is that it is gentrifying the neighborhood, and neighborhoods don't want that, right?
And I have personally found that argument, to be absolute and total bullshit, because as someone who has gone to South LA, who has been on those outreach projects, who has spoken to local residents at those open houses as they look at those protected bike lanes or whatever, you virtually never hear that argument. Right. You hear that argument from people who are extremely online or in academia who are getting paid for those opinions, right? So what is my thesis? My thesis is that along the way, we decided that outreach was the progressive thing to do. I think the progressive thing to do is to save poor kids' lives. And I think that we should be just simply implementing them and saying, we know this scientifically saves lives. We don't ask permission to fix an airplane crashing of what the community thinks about it. They know that there are ways to engineer a street that will save lives. And I think this idea that we have to go do a $3.5 million contract for 3 corridors and then watch a 9-year-old get killed at a traffic circle that didn't get installed for 6 years, my blood pressure is through the roof. Like, I don't understand this point of view. I'm never going to relate to that point of view. And it is, incidentally, it is the conventional wisdom of the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, and it's the conventional wisdom of the nonprofits who are consulting with the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. We need to let go of outreach being the goal and making saving lives the end goal.
Right.
But because we're wasting all this money on outreach and stasis and this grinding process, for God's sakes, for 10 years since we started doing outreach on Sunset for All. Yeah. And it was already in the city's plans to begin with. It's not like we had to start it from scratch. The Bicycle Advisory Committee said that Sunset is the most important bike lane project in the city of Los Angeles right now from a corridor standpoint, from creating a usable network for active transportation. So I think network effects need to be as important as social goals.
Well, I'm frustrated listening to you, and I can tell that you're frustrated over the past decade.
They broke me, Taylor. They broke me.
They broke me. The only thing I can say is thank you for all of the time and effort and work that you've put into getting it this far. And hopefully we, as advocates across, the area, can take it across the finish line, because it is an important connector for the city of Los Angeles. Terence Heuston of Sunset for All, thanks for a decade of your life.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And I just want to reiterate that there have been hundreds of people who walked those blocks and who have done so much work, and so many partners that have done such incredible work and volunteered so much time, that I just want to be careful that we're really shining a light on them too, because and now new people have, are lifting up that baton and running with it. And I think it's great to see the new generation of community activists, taking it over the finish line. But it's a huge group project.
I just wish it didn't take multiple generations.
Multiple generations. It's great to see you again. Thanks so much for having me.
You can hear the frustration in Terence's voice. My only hope is that it is going to get realized and the project is going to move forward.
So maybe they'll support it. Good show.
We want to thank Caron Whitaker, Terence Heuston, Sophia Lebowitz, Shabazz, Stuart, and of course all our regulars, Julie Richard, Kevin Burton, Charlie Lighthizer, Amy Ziering, Lindsay Sturman, Stacey Randecker, and Josh Hagland.
And we're going to do 2 bike thoughts, right?
Right.
I'm going to do the anti-car bike thought.
Sure.
This was on Blue Sky, and it's from Gravel Influencer. Welcome to the United States, where car dependency means spending increasing amounts of money to fill your car with gas so you can get to the job that provides your health insurance.
Perfect. That's such a negative realization of what's going on in the United States, but it's so true. Mm-hmm. My quote is, bikers don't follow the crowd. They make their own path.
Love it. Thanks, Taylor.
Ride safe.
This episode of Bike Talk is sponsored by the law offices of Pocras and De Los Reyes, with offices in Los Angeles and Bakersfield, and serving all of Southern California.
Bike Talk is a project of CRSP and the Los Angeles Eco-Village Institute. And that was Bike Talk. If you have a story, a tip, or a topic, head over to biketalk.org and send us a message. Talk again next week.
Better get yourself a bike. Get yourself a bike. Oh, 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 get yourself a bike.